Hey everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm writing this because I need to get something off my chest. My wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 7 years. On the surface, we seem like your typical suburban couple. 2 incomes, no kids, nice house with a little yard. Sarah works in consulting, which means frequent business trips. I never thought much of it. Her job always seemed demanding but rewarding. I mean, she's smart, ambitious, and confident, qualities that made me fall for her in the first place. But lately, something hasn't felt right. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but Sarah's behavior started to change. She was traveling more often, at least twice a month, and her demeanor when she came home was different. She wasn't the warm, affectionate woman I married. Instead, she seemed distracted, almost detached, like her mind was elsewhere. Then there were the little things. She started dressing up more for her trips. Heels, dresses, and expensive perfume she never wore around the house. She also became oddly protective of her phone, something she never used to care about. And then, about a week ago, I found an unfamiliar receipt for a hotel dinner for 2 in her purse. She brushed it off, saying it was just a client meeting, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The final straw came last night. We were having dinner, and she casually mentioned needing to leave for a last-minute trip to Dallas this weekend. She claimed it was for an urgent client meeting, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. I nodded, trying to act normal, but inside, I was reeling. I've decided to follow her. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I need to know if my suspicions are real or if I'm just paranoid. Either way, this weekend is going to change everything. So, Sarah left for her business trip this morning. She was up early, packing her suitcase while humming some pop tune like she didn't have a care in the world. Watching her act so nonchalant only fueled the storm brewing inside me. I helped load her suitcase into the car, kissed her goodbye, and said, "Travel safe." She smiled, but I swear there was something in her eyes. Relief? Guilt? Maybe I'm just projecting. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I got to work. I had spent the past couple of days preparing for this. I took Friday off without telling her, so I could follow her unnoticed. The night before, I installed a tracker on her car. I know it sounds extreme, but after weeks of unanswered questions, I needed concrete answers. I waited for the tracker to ping her location. She was heading toward the airport, just like she said. For a brief moment, I felt guilty for doubting her. But that guilt was short-lived when the tracker showed her stopping in the long-term parking lot. If this were a last-minute trip, wouldn't she have just taken a cab or rideshare? I waited about 10 minutes after her car stopped before I pulled into the parking lot myself. I didn't see her, but I found her car in row G, just as the tracker indicated. I parked a few rows away, locked my car, and headed toward the terminal. She didn't check a bag, only her carry-on, and her gate was listed for a flight to Austin. I got in line for a ticket to the same flight. Was this really a business trip? Or was Austin the rendezvous point for something else? The weird thing was, Sarah looked almost giddy as she sat at the gate, scrolling through her phone. This wasn't the frazzled, stressed-out consultant I had married. She wasn't reviewing notes or talking on her Bluetooth. Instead, she was grinning like someone texting a new crush. I boarded the plane a few minutes after her and sat 4 rows back. She didn't see me. She was too busy chatting with the flight attendant, who handed her a mimosa. Sarah was clearly in high spirits, which only confirmed my worst fears. When the plane landed, I kept my distance as she made her way through the terminal. I followed her to the rideshare pickup zone, where she got into a black sedan. I quickly hailed another ride and told the driver to follow her car. My heart raced as we wove through Austin streets. Her car stopped outside a boutique hotel. The driver opened the door for her, and she stepped out, adjusting her sunglasses and smoothing down her dress. I couldn't help but notice she'd swapped her work blazer for something more casual and flirty. What happened next is where my world started to crumble. Another car pulled up, and a man got out. A tall, good-looking guy with dark hair and an expensive watch. He smiled at Sarah like she was the only woman in the world, and she practically melted into his arms. They kissed. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. My vision blurred, and my ears started ringing. There was no mistaking what I was seeing. I snapped a few photos, shaky but clear enough, and told the driver to take me back to my hotel. I needed time to think. Who the hell was this guy? How long had this been going on? Back at the hotel, I opened a folder I'd prepared just in case. It had everything I might need to confront her. Screenshots of her lies, the tracker logs, and now these damning photos. But as I stared at the evidence, I realized I wasn't the only one who needed answers. What about this guy? Did he know she was married? I'm gonna find out. After seeing Sarah with the other man, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions, each one more maddening than the last. Who was he? Did he know about me? And most importantly, how long had this been going on? I couldn't confront her yet, not without knowing the full story. So I focused on him. The next morning, I checked out of my hotel early and went back to the boutique hotel where Sarah was staying. I parked across the street and waited. It didn't take long. Around 9 a.m., I spotted him leaving the hotel. He was wearing a fitted polo and jeans, carrying a laptop bag slung casually over his shoulder. He looked normal. If I passed him on the street, I wouldn't have thought twice about him. But now he was the guy who had kissed my wife like she belonged to him. I tailed him as he walked down the street. He stopped at a coffee shop, ordered something, and sat by the window, opening his laptop. From my car, I snapped a photo of him and used a reverse image search app I downloaded. It didn't take long to match his face to a LinkedIn profile. His name was Daniel Harper. He was a marketing executive for a tech startup based out of Dallas. 39, single, with no kids. According to his profile, he traveled often for work, which probably explained how he and Sarah had kept this hidden for so long. Armed with his name, I dug deeper. By the time I left the coffee shop, I had a good picture of who this guy was. He seemed successful, polished, and, from the looks of his social media, completely unaware that the woman he was seeing was married. I decided to reach out. I needed to know what he knew about Sarah. Using a burner phone, I sent him a text. "Hi, Daniel. You don't know me, but we need to talk. It's about Sarah." It didn't take long for him to respond. "Who is this? How did you get my number?" "I'm her husband." The 3 dots indicating he was typing appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. I imagined him sitting there, blindsided, trying to make sense of what I just told him. Finally, his reply came through. "That's impossible. Sarah isn't married." I sent him one of the photos I'd taken of him and Sarah at the hotel, along with a picture of my wedding ring sitting on the kitchen counter. This time, the typing dots didn't appear for a long while. When his next message came through, it was brief but telling. "Where can we meet?" We agreed on a park near the hotel. I parked a few blocks away and walked to the meeting spot, my nerves on edge. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, leaning against a bench, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. "Are you Alex?" he asked, his voice cautious but firm. I nodded. "And you're Daniel." For a few moments, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, sizing each other up. Finally, he broke the silence. "Is this some kind of joke? Sarah told me she was single." "It's not a joke," I said, my voice tight. "We've been married for 7 years." "What did she tell you?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "She said she'd been divorced for years, that her ex was controlling and didn't treat her right." I had no reason to question her. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah had painted me as some monster to justify her lies. "Do you know how long this has been going on?" I asked. He hesitated. 2 years. We met at a conference. I swear, I didn't know. 2 years. For 2 years, she had been leading this double life. "We need to confront her," I said, my voice hardening. "Together." Daniel nodded, his jaw set. "Agreed. She's been lying to both of us. She doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed." As we shook hands, a strange sense of camaraderie passed between us. We were 2 men, both blindsided, both betrayed, united by a shared goal, to make Sarah answer for her lies. This wasn't over. Meeting Daniel was surreal. If someone had told me a week ago that I'd be shaking hands with my wife's lover, I'd have laughed in their face. But there we were, two strangers, both deceived by the same woman, now reluctantly forming a team. After our conversation at the park, Daniel and I walked to a nearby coffee shop to strategize. The tension between us was palpable, but there was also a mutual understanding. We wanted answers, and more than that, we wanted Sarah to face the consequences of her deceit. "I can't believe this," Daniel muttered, staring into his untouched coffee. 2 years. She never gave me any reason to doubt her. "Same here," I said bitterly. "She had me believing she was just a hard-working wife, always out there building a future for us. Meanwhile, she was building something entirely different with you." Daniel flinched at the comment, but I didn't hold back. He wasn't the one I was angry with, not really. Still, it felt cathartic to voice the thoughts that had been festering in my mind. "So, what's the plan?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. I leaned back in my chair, thinking, we need to catch her off guard. If she has time to think, she'll spin another lie and wriggle her way out of this. The goal is to get her in a situation where she has no choice but to come clean. Daniel nodded. "But how do we do that? She doesn't even know I know about you." "Exactly," I said. "That's our leverage. She won't see this coming if we play it right." Over the next hour, we pieced together a plan. The boutique hotel where Sarah and Daniel were staying had a small restaurant. Daniel suggested inviting her there for dinner under the guise of a romantic evening. Meanwhile, I would be waiting nearby, ready to walk in at just the right moment. "She'll never expect it," Daniel said, his tone resolute. "She'll think it's just another date night with me. And when you show up, well, let's see how good she is at lying her way out of that." "And if she tries?" I asked. "She won't," Daniel replied firmly, "because I'll have questions too. And I won't stop until I get answers." We agreed on the details. Daniel would text Sarah, inviting her to dinner that evening. I'd arrive early, taking a seat at a nearby table where I could observe without being seen. When the time was right, I'd confront her, and Daniel would back me up. As the plan solidified, a part of me felt sick. This wasn't the kind of man I ever thought I'd become. Someone plotting an ambush against the woman he loved. But then again, Sarah wasn't the woman I thought she was. Before we parted ways, Daniel hesitated. "One thing," he said, his voice quieter now. "When we confront her, what do you want out of this? Are you trying to save your marriage?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. All I knew was that I needed the truth, and tonight I was going to get it. By the time evening rolled around, my nerves were shot. I couldn't focus on anything. My hands trembled, my mind raced, and every scenario I imagined ended with Sarah lying her way out of the confrontation. But there was no turning back now. I arrived at the hotel restaurant 30 minutes early, just as Daniel suggested. The place was upscale but intimate, with low lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. I chose a corner table, one with a clear view of where Daniel and Sarah would be seated. The waiter approached, and I ordered a drink, hoping it would calm my fraying nerves. At 7:15, Daniel walked in, his expression calm but tense. He caught my eye briefly, giving a subtle nod before he approached the hostess and asked for a table. A few moments later, Sarah arrived. She walked in like she owned the place, confident, radiant, and utterly clueless about the storm brewing around her. She was wearing a sleek black dress, the kind she used to wear on date nights with me. The sight of her laughing with Daniel, completely at ease, sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. They were seated at a table not far from mine. I strained to hear their conversation but couldn't make out much over the hum of the restaurant. Sarah seemed relaxed, leaning toward Daniel and twirling her hair in that flirtatious way she used to do with me. Daniel was playing his part well, smiling, nodding, and acting like everything was normal. I had to admit, the guy had nerves of steel. At precisely 7:30, he looked toward me. It was the signal. My heart felt like it was going to explode as I stood and walked toward their table. Sarah didn't notice me at first. She was too busy laughing at something Daniel said. But when I stopped just a few feet away, her laughter froze mid-note. "Hi, Sarah," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned toward me, her face paling instantly. Alex? What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, I replied, crossing my arms. But I think I already know. Her eyes darted to Daniel, who sat back in his chair, watching her carefully. Wait, she stammered. How do you two? Daniel cut her off. I think the more important question is, how could you lie to both of us? Sarah's jaw dropped. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, completely unprepared for the situation unfolding around her. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice rising slightly. Don't play dumb, I snapped, pulling out my phone and showing her the photos I had taken of her and Daniel. 2 years, Sarah. 2 years of lies. How could you do this? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. And you, Daniel added, his voice cold, you told me you were divorced, that your ex was some controlling jerk. Was that just part of your act? Sarah's face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened her shoulders, her expression shifting to one of defiance. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling but determined. It's not what it looks like. I laughed bitterly. Not what it looks like. Sarah, I've seen enough. You've been living a double life, stringing both of us along like we're idiots. Daniel nodded. And you're not going to talk your way out of this. We both deserve the truth. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. She just sat there, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. Fine, she said quietly. You want the truth? I'll tell you everything. And with that, the facade she had carefully crafted began to crumble. Sarah took a deep breath, avoiding eye contact with either of us. Her confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something almost unrecognizable, vulnerability. But I wasn't going to let her off easy. Start talking, I demanded. We've both waited long enough. She hesitated, her fingers still gripping the edge of the table. It started 2 years ago, she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the restaurant. I met Daniel at a conference in Dallas. At first, it was just friendly. We talked about work, shared a few drinks, but then it became more. Daniel's jaw tightened. You told me you were divorced, that your ex was a manipulative jerk who made you miserable. Was that all a lie? Sarah winced, looking at him for the first time. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said. At first, I just wanted to escape. Things with Alex were strained. Strained, I snapped. Sarah, we had a good marriage. Or at least I thought we did. What exactly was so terrible that you felt the need to create a whole other life? She finally looked at me, her blue eyes filled with something I couldn't quite identify. Regret? Shame? Or was it just an act? I don't know, she admitted, shaking her head. It wasn't about you, Alex. It was about me. I felt trapped, like I'd lost who I was. And Daniel, she glanced at him briefly. He made me feel alive again. Alive, I said bitterly. While you were killing our marriage? Daniel interjected, his voice icy. You told me you wanted to build a future together. That we'd move to Dallas once you were free of your past. Was any of that true? Or was I just another escape route? Sarah's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and I could feel the weight of her lies crashing down around us. Finally, she lifted her head and whispered, I didn't think it would go this far. I thought I could keep it separate. My life with Alex and my relationship with you, Daniel. But it got out of control. And now I've hurt both of you. That's your excuse? I said, my voice rising. You were bored. So you decided to lie to everyone who trusted you? It wasn't just boredom, she snapped, her voice cracking. I was suffocating, Alex. You always wanted everything to be perfect. The perfect house, the perfect marriage, the perfect life. But I'm not perfect. I can't live up to that. The accusation stunned me into silence. I didn't know whether to feel anger, pity, or disgust. Daniel wasn't any gentler. You used me, he said, his voice hard. You made me think we had something real, that we were building a life together. And the whole time, you were lying to my face. Sarah turned to him, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I didn't mean to hurt either of you. I didn't know how to stop. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Well, it stops now. You're going to choose Sarah. Right here, right now. No more lies, no more games. Who do you want? She looked at me, then at Daniel, her face pale and drawn. I can't, she started, her voice trembling.
No, interrupta.
You can, and you will, because if you don't, we're both walking out of here, and you'll have no one. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sat there, staring at the table as if it held the answer she couldn't find within herself. Finally, she whispered, I choose myself. Daniel and I both froze, the weight of her words sinking in. What the hell does that even mean? I demanded. It means I can't fix this, she said, her voice barely audible. I've ruined everything, and I don't deserve either of you. So, I'm letting you go. Her words hit like a gut punch. For years I had built my life around her, and now she was throwing it all away. Daniel stood abruptly, shaking his head. You're unbelievable, he said, his voice full of disdain. Enjoy your freedom, Sarah. You'll be alone in it. Without another word, he walked out of the restaurant, leaving me sitting across from the woman I thought I knew. I stared at her for a long moment, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, but no words came. Finally, I stood, slid the photos across the table, and said, You deserve them as a souvenir of what you destroyed. Then I turned and walked away, leaving Sarah behind to pick up the pieces of her shattered lies. Walking out of that restaurant was one of the hardest things I've ever done. As much as I wanted to stay and scream, to demand answers, I realized there was nothing left to salvage. Sarah's choice wasn't a choice at all, it was an escape. And for the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. Selfish, deceitful, and incapable of genuine commitment. Outside, Daniel was leaning against a lamppost, staring out at the city lights. He looked as shattered as I felt. For a moment, I considered just walking past him and going my own way, but something stopped me. You okay? I asked, though the answer was obvious. He shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. Not even close. You? Not even close, I echoed. We stood there in silence, two men who had been betrayed by the same woman, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, Daniel broke the quiet. She fooled both of us, he said. Made us think we were the only ones in her world, when in reality, we were just distractions. I nodded, the truth of his words hitting me hard. Distractions from what, though? She didn't even seem to know what she wanted. That's the worst part, he said, turning to face me. We weren't competing with each other. We were competing with her own damn emptiness. His words struck a chord. I had spent so much time blaming myself, wondering what I had done wrong, when the truth was that Sarah's choices had nothing to do with me or Daniel. She had her own demons, her own insecurities, and she dragged both of us into her mess without a second thought. So what now? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I was asking him or myself. Daniel shrugged. I don't know. I guess I go back to Dallas and try to rebuild my life. Try to remember what it was like before her. Same here, I said, except without the Dallas part. We shared a small, humorless chuckle. As strange as it sounds, I felt a weird sense of camaraderie with Daniel. He wasn't the enemy I had imagined him to be when this all started. He was just another victim like me, and in a way, knowing I wasn't alone in this made it a little easier to bear. Before we parted ways, Daniel reached out his hand. Good luck, Alex, he said sincerely. You too, I replied, shaking his hand. As he walked away, I felt an odd mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what I had lost, but relief that I wasn't stuck in Sarah's web of lies anymore. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. Sarah's things were still scattered everywhere, her books on the coffee table, her shoes by the door, her jacket hanging on the back of a chair. For a moment, I considered grabbing a trash bag and tossing it all out, but I stopped myself. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, letting the reality of my new life sink in. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Daniel. "Thanks for having my back tonight. If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Same to you." For the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of the world. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. The days after the confrontation were a blur. The weight of what had happened hung over me like a storm cloud, but at least now I had clarity. Sarah hadn't contacted me since that night at the restaurant. Part of me was surprised, but mostly I felt relieved. She wasn't going to fight for our marriage, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted her to. I decided it was time to move forward. The first step was addressing the practical side of things, our house, our finances, and inevitably the divorce. I reached out to an attorney I'd researched during those sleepless nights leading up to the confrontation. She was straightforward and compassionate. Exactly what I needed. As we went over the details of my marriage, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. I was letting go of a life I thought was solid, but I was also freeing myself from the lies. "You're doing the right thing," my attorney said, her voice steady. "This will be hard, but it's also a chance to rebuild." Rebuilding. That word stuck with me. The next weekend, I started clearing out the house. It was painful at first. Every item of Sarah's felt like a small betrayal, a reminder of the woman I thought she was. Her favorite coffee mug, the stack of books she never finished, the photo of us smiling at the Grand Canyon during our honeymoon. All of it told a story that no longer felt real. I packed it all into boxes and set them aside. I wasn't ready to throw them away, but I couldn't keep living with them in plain sight either. Then came the hard part, deciding what to say to our friends and family. Sarah and I had built a life together that intertwined with so many others. People would ask questions, and I needed to be prepared. I kept it simple. "Sarah and I are separating. Things didn't work out the way I hoped, but I'll be okay." Most people were supportive, though a few were clearly shocked. Sarah had always been good at keeping up appearances, so the news blindsided a lot of people. One evening, I got a call from Daniel. "Hey," he said, his voice lighter than the last time we'd spoken. "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" "Better," I admitted, starting to move on little by little. "Good," he said. "Same here. It's weird, though. Some days I wake up and forget for a second, and then it all comes crashing back." "Yeah," I said. "I know what you mean." We talked for a while, sharing stories of the little things we were doing to move forward. It felt good to talk to someone who understood exactly what I was going through. By the end of the call, we'd made tentative plans to grab a drink the next time he was in town. When I hung up, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not at Daniel and not even at Sarah. The pain was still there, sure, but it wasn't consuming me like it had before. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the boxes of Sarah's things stacked by the door. It was time to let go. Letting go turned out to be a slower process than I expected. Each day, I chipped away at the life Sarah and I had built together, clearing space for something new. I donated most of her things to charity, boxed up our wedding photos and mementos, and finally started rearranging the house to feel like mine, not ours. It was cathartic, but it wasn't just the physical space I was reclaiming. I was starting to feel more like myself again, remembering who I was before Sarah became the center of my world. One afternoon, Daniel called. "Hey, I'm in town for a conference," he said. "Want to grab that drink?" "Sure," I said. "I know just the place." We met at a quiet bar not far from my house. It felt strange at first, sitting across from the man who had unknowingly been part of Sarah's double life. But as the conversation flowed, the awkwardness faded. "You know," Daniel said after his second beer, "if someone told me a month ago I'd be having drinks with my girlfriend's husband, I'd have laughed in their face." I chuckled, raising my glass. "Same here. Life's weird, isn't it?" He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Weird, but I don't know. In a way, I think this whole thing might have been a wake-up call. I was so focused on Sarah, on what I thought we were building, that I ignored all the red flags. Same here, I admitted. I wanted to believe we had this perfect marriage. I ignored the signs because the truth was too hard to face. Daniel leaned back, studying me. So what now? What's next for you? I shrugged. I don't know yet. I'm still figuring that out. But I think I'm ready to move forward. To stop living in the past. Good, he said, raising his glass. Here's to moving forward. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine sense of hope. Over the next few months, Daniel and I stayed in touch. We weren't best friends or anything, but we'd check in every so often, sharing updates on our respective journeys. It was odd, this bond we'd formed, but it also felt right. We were two people who had been through the same storm, and somehow we'd both come out stronger. One day, I got a text from him. Met someone new. Feels different this time. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled, typing back. Happy for you, man. You deserve it. For me, the road to healing was a little slower. I wasn't ready to jump into anything new, but that was okay. I spent more time with friends, picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage, and even started therapy to work through the lingering pain. Each day felt a little lighter than the last. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a book and a glass of wine, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Sarah was no longer the center of my world. Her betrayal no longer defined me. I had taken the pieces of my shattered life and started building something new. And for the first time, I believed it was going to be okay. Months turned into a year, and the pain that once consumed me began to fade into a distant memory. Sarah and I finalized the divorce with little fanfare. True to form, she didn't put up a fight. No heartfelt apologies, no dramatic pleas. She signed the papers, and that was that. It was strange how anticlimactic it felt to sever what was once the most important bond in my life. But I realized that the version of Sarah I'd loved didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. Life went on, and slowly but surely I began to rebuild. One sunny Saturday, I decided to visit the local farmer's market. It was something Sarah and I used to do together, but this time, it felt like a fresh start rather than a painful reminder. As I browsed through the stalls, I heard someone call my name. Alex. I turned and saw Daniel, standing by a stand of homemade candles with a woman by his side. She was tall, with curly brown hair and a warm smile that lit up her entire face. Daniel, I said, genuinely surprised. What are you doing here? I'm in town for the weekend, he said, grinning. This is Mia. Mia extended her hand. Nice to meet you. Daniel's told me a lot about you. All good things, I hope? I said, shaking her hand. Mostly, she said with a wink. We chatted for a while, catching up. Daniel seemed genuinely happy, and it was clear that Mia was a big part of that. Seeing him so at ease made me realize how far we'd both come since the nightmare of Sarah's betrayal. After we said our goodbyes, I walked through the market with a lighter heart. Seeing Daniel happy didn't make me envious. It gave me hope. Later that afternoon, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I reflected on how much my life had changed. The man who sat in the same spot a year ago, drowning in anger and heartbreak, felt like a stranger to me now. I had found peace, not by forgetting what happened, but by learning from it. Sarah's betrayal had taught me hard truths about trust, love, and resilience. And while I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, I was grateful for the person it had helped me become. I was stronger now, wiser, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to open myself up to whatever life had in store next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I smiled to myself. The past was behind me, the future was mine to write, and I couldn't wait to see what came next.